Hey, how you doing, Mr. Rick?
All right, man. I got a face to match up with it. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
You got the
So I
old man today.
got, yeah. So I got three questions for you today.
All right. Okay, go ahead.
So the first question is when controlling a deal, right? So my question is when showing an occupied property to a buyer, how do you prevent the buyer from interacting with the seller if you're doing the deal virtually?
Okay. That's a really good question. Actually, really good. So you're doing it virtually, correct?
Yes.
So you're talking about a property you have under contract and you
Hmm.
want to bring buyers in there to basically assign your contract, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So even locally, this can be challenging. Okay. So virtually, it's much more. So here's the first thing you have to define is the temperament of your seller. Is the property owner occupied? Is the owner living in the property?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have it like an actual property in the
Okay.
contract. I'm
Okay.
just
So
asking
here's
like for future references.
okay. So there's no one blanket answer for this. So virtually is more challenging, but like this is going to be the same locally. Everything is dictated on the temperament of your seller. Okay. So if I'm virtual and I have a property, say it's like a probate deal and the property's vacant, no one's there, it
Mhm.
doesn't really matter. Like
Right.
just use smart discretion. Um, I've seen people abuse this. They'll send 20 or 30 people down, and the neighbors get really concerned. Like there's all sorts of traffic at the house, and they call them. That could ruin your deal. The problem comes in when they're owner occupied properties, especially virtually. Okay.
Right.
There is no way, in my opinion, you are going to send a seller in there and do the whole thing remotely without any type of local help. You're going to get killed.
Right.
Okay. So the best thing you can do at that point, if you have an established market, is find someone. You're going to have to pay them a little bit of money or even give them a tiny piece of the deal and ensure they walk them through correctly on that property because unless the property is flat out vacant, you are running a massive risk. Because if that buyer talks to the seller and goes, "Hey, Jay offered me this property for 150,000," it's like, "No, Jay's buying it for me from 100,000." It's going to be a horrid conversation.
Right.
And for that
Exactly.
reason, if you paid someone 50 or 75 bucks to run them through and go, listen, your job is just to show them the house and isolate the seller from the cash buyer.
Right.
Okay. I just talked to, I think she was on here earlier. Brooklyn was doing a deal. She's somewhere, I believe, in South Carolina. I apologize, not the right place. But like locally, sometimes I have challenges. Um, I recently did one on a property we had because four buyers showed up. Like it was all like one company, and there was one seller, and I'm just like, it's so your job is once you have the property under contract, you number one, determine the temperament of the seller. Are they easygoing? Is it easy? Then you can get away with a lot more. If they're very like freaked out, you have to do the right kind of call. Now, if it's virtually, I would probably pay someone to walk them through. Here's the caveat to the buyer: you've got to underwrite them like crazy because you don't want to waste. Like if the seller's really tough, you want to make sure that they're okay with the numbers, they're okay with the area, they're okay with the price, they have the proof of funds. It's just a final inspection. So many cash buyers, especially virtually, treat the inspection as like, I'll see if it's going to work or not. No, 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 no. We have to be like good on the numbers and everything else. And then you get them there. And then honestly, you have to pay someone if the seller's living there. I would pay someone 50, 75 bucks, maybe 100, depending on what you're marketing. And their job is to make sure that new cash buyer never talks to the seller. You know how you do that? Most of the time, the person sits there and they just have a cup of coffee with the seller and their job is to play defensive tackle the entire time. I don't want them to show the house. The seller's going to walk through and figure out what he wants and say, and at the end, I just train them. Your job, sit down, make the seller happy. Just talk to them about the day, the weather, the family. And then as soon as the buyer's done, you walk them out, tell the seller right there and say, listen, if you got any questions, let me know. They give you the questions, they give them back to you, and you deal with the new buyer on that. And that's the challenge. When they're vacant, it's kind of a piece of cake. Just don't abuse your privileges on it. I have these problems locally. Like And then also, here's a key question. If you're going to hire someone to do that for you, I think it's worth the expense. Make sure you verify how many people are going to that inspection. It's
Right.
critical. And tell the guy, if there's more than 2 people to get out of that car, just stop them right there and get on the phone with you and go, like, who's this third person? A lot of times they'll bring their contractor and stuff like that. And you got to say, listen, here's the deal. If you guys screw this up and talk to the seller, there's going to be a problem with this. And I'm not going to share any of these deals with you. So a lot of times it's not even the cash buyer that's the problem. It's the contractor, or sometimes it's the spouse, and they start commenting. And you're like, I go, listen, do me a favor, go and take a look at the house as quickly as you can, and then I'll meet you out front. No comments, nothing. We don't want to upset the seller. They're very sensitive. They have some issues going on. You have to be sensitive to that stuff. So if you can train a person just to do that, it doesn't cost a lot of money. It's not worth cutting somebody in thousands of dollars to do that. And I had to do that a few times in the beginning, and I stopped doing that. It's cheaper to pay them 50, 75, $100 as opposed to giving them a percentage of the profit, which you can still do. It depends on how you want to do it. Sometimes
Right.
they're hard and you need help, and sometimes they're super easy. So most of it is the seller's temperament. Does it make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Every
Thank you so much
wholesale,
for that.
by the way, every wholesale has to go through that process. If it's local or virtually, you
Mhm.
have to weigh up, because here's the reality, guys. And I want everybody to hear this on this live. If your seller is flexible and like agreeable, you will actually make more money. If they're extremely difficult and staunch, you have to respect it because you lose the deal. But the reality is you don't have as many options. Sometimes I have sellers, I can only get 1 or 2 buyers ever in the property, and I know it. And I tell my team, I go, dude, make sure we get it. And sometimes we take a substantial discount for that. So know that in your numbers when you go into it.
Absolutely. All right. Thank
Okay.
you so much for that. Second question was on the day of closing. I've been hearing that it's like it's really bad to have both the seller and the buyer show up at closing at the same time, because things can kind of get a little bit like confusing and then the deal can fall apart. So who's supposed to arrive first? Is it the seller that's supposed to arrive first, or is it the buyer that's supposed to arrive first to the closing?
So um, it technically doesn't matter, but the most important, well, they're both important to have there. So remember, you just have a document, you have a contract. Okay.
Right.
It's the equivalent of having an engagement ring. Okay. Just because someone's engaged to you doesn't mean they're going to show up to the ceremony. Okay. And
Right.
so many things can happen up to a point. So honestly, it doesn't matter. I just don't like to have them at the same time. So usually what my title company is, we'll have the seller come in at, so most sellers they want a final answer to walk out with their money. Okay. Now, if you have a wishy-washy seller, take whatever time you can get and just deal with it. Okay. Because if they don't show up, you don't get a deal. But if the
Right.
seller's normal, I'll have the buyer go and do all the paperwork, get all their money set up and everything. And so I'll have them come in at like 10 a.m. And then I usually give a 2-hour window. I can't tell you how most people at a closing, they get really excited. Most people show up like an hour early all the time. I did a closing 2 weeks ago. I was at the title company and I got to talking to one of the girls there about some other stuff. And I wound up being there an extra 45 minutes. And lo and behold, the buyer walked in.
Oh
And then
wow.
they asked me, they go, "Are you the guy that owns?" I'm just like, oh, God. Now, I don't lie to people. I'm like, yeah. Sat down for 30, 40 minutes, and they were like, honestly, I could have said stuff that screwed up the deal. So in the perfect world, I have the buyer come in, they do all their paperwork, everything, all their money's been paid. The seller comes in at noon. So when the seller signs, it's final, it's done. They don't run into anyone else because the seller only knows you. So in
Right.
the beginning, I'll be honest with you, I used to walk in with the seller. If the seller is difficult, sometimes in the beginning, I used to do it, then Zach would do it, and then we have someone for our sales staff. Sometimes you have to hold sellers' hands because they're a little bit, it's just the truth. Okay.
Right.
And you have to get them through that process. But if you get the seller done, if you get the buyer done first and have the seller come at the end, they can usually walk out of there with their check or instructions of where their money's going to get wired at. And that's all they ask you in the end. Jay, when am I getting my money? So when they go to the title company, they're eager to get their money. If you do it the other way, have them sign the day before, they're going to ask you 10 times when they're getting paid. And so I like to put it on the title company.
Okay, I got
Make
you.
sense?
Yes,
And then the
absolutely,
idea
absolutely.
is like the reason wholesaling, you don't want to put a buyer and seller because they don't know the buyer. They don't know them and they're going to get confused very quickly. So if you have to go to represent it, just when the seller goes to sell, you just go and kind of rub their back and call it a day. Remember, realtors that do traditional real estate, they all show up because they know a storm is brewing, because here's the reality. Most of the closing packages from the banks all come in like an hour before the closing, and it's just a train wreck. And the realtor's like, I didn't know. The buyer's like, I didn't know I was getting this interest rate. So why do I have to sign all this stuff? It's yes or no, or you don't get the house, and your contract expires today. And then the realtors start fighting in the hallway. It happens all that. With wholesalers, we don't have any surprises. We try to get rid of them, and so you don't want that confrontation. So the problem is why, if you can avoid being at the closing table, because when you go to the closing table, either the seller or the buyer, in my experience, more than half the time, they will ask you for something, right? If I ask for something, I'll get it. Honestly, I do it every time. If I'm not talking about wholesaling properties, but like I buy commercial property stuff, if I can get a hold of the seller, I will go after him till the final day, till the money's released. And that's why I know a selling's very final, and I'm whoever asks the most gets the most at the closing table. So if you're not there, you can't ask me. So I put on another layer after about 2 years of wholesaling. Every now and then, like little BS stuff would come up. Hey, Rick, the pool pump didn't turn on. They did a final walkthrough. I'm like, how much can a pool pump be? I'm not going to negotiate. And I would tell my escrow agent, you have $500 to go either way. Just get the deal closed. And she goes, I gave them $200. I'm like, thank you. So does that answer your question, guys? Wholesaling,
Absolutely.
you really don't want to be at the closing table unless you have to make your seller feel good, or if you want to get a testimonial, not a bad way to do it. Um, and then if you want to be there with your buyer, but honestly, that's like realtor stuff. If you have everything set up before and it's just about funding and handing over the keys, and that's it.
Gotcha, gotcha. And so, final question:
Yes.
in your class, you mentioned wholesale and investor are the two things that you shouldn't mention to a seller. But I've been reading a lot of posts in the Facebook group and also watching other videos, and some wholesalers come across sellers who ask them straight up, "Are you a wholesaler or are you an investor?" So, like, how do we answer that question if wholesale and investor are the two things that we
So
shouldn't be saying
let
to
me
a
ask you
seller?
this. Is a wholesaler synonymous with a cash buyer?
No,
Why not?
I'm
So,
not sure. Tell me why.
okay. So here's what I'm. So the purpose of today's lesson, and this is a good point. So I appreciate the question, Jay. And I'm not picking on you. I'm just talking is
No, you're fine.
words have definitions. Sometimes what I define it and you define it are different words. That's why we have so many problems in our country. Like what I label this word, you label that word, and then if like we don't agree on it, and instead of talking it out, we just start fighting, like verbally, not physically. So what I'm trying to do with the seller is avoid any confrontation or any preconceived notions. Okay. Right now, if I tell you lawyer, what's the first word that pops in your head without thinking about it?
Court.
There you go. Like, see, so that's you didn't have to think about it, and that's the problem. Is wholesaling's now been out a long enough that people go, okay, if they don't have the answer, they're going to ask someone. They go, hey, I'm dealing with this wholesaler. What should I be watching out for? Like, oh, watch out. If you Google wholesaling enough, you are going to get negative connotations. Okay. If I tell you network marketing, what are you going to say? What's your first thought in your head?
Network marketing, like Facebook, social media, advertising. That's things that come to my
Well,
head.
I'm talking about like multi-level network marketing. You know, the guy who comes to you and goes, hey, listen, Jay, I got this great product. And if you just give me 10 of your friends, you'll get $500 for each one. And we'll just keep pushing this thing till you're like so rich, you don't know what to do.
Also,
That's
kind of like a spider web, like a
yeah, that
spider
type of
network.
deal. So it's like, so if I tell you I'm a multi-level marketing and I want to meet with you, you're probably going to do everything in your power to get out of that meeting, right?
Right.
Sellers are going to do the same thing. Okay. So if you go, hey, listen, I'm Jay, I'm a wholesaler. If they ask you, you go, yeah, I'm a wholesaler. Like, great. I'll see you tomorrow at 8 p.m. Then they start they start Googling wholesaling. I'm not even going to do it right now, but I promise you there's more negativity than positivity on it. And that's the problem is they're going to make a ridiculous assumption. We're not all the same. There are some really bad wholesalers out there. I can't stop them. I can only help the ones going forward. So, am I lying? No, because our business requires cash to close it. At some point, you will have to cash fund a deal, either with your money, the bank's money, or one of your cash partners. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
For that reason, you are a cash buyer. Okay. When I started out in wholesaling, I had no idea what I was doing in 2003. Nobody gave me advice. No, I go, how the heck am I going to represent myself as a cash buyer if I don't have the cash in the bank? And I had to go through this. I went through this ridiculous thing where I actually went to a bank and I got qualified for a loan and got a pre-approval letter. And I walked around with that thing knowing worst case scenario, if I couldn't close on it, I showed them I had the ability to close on it. Now, keep in mind, I was older. I had a regular job. I'm giving you full disclosure. I never used it, but I always had a plan if I had to close on it. I don't like to lie to people, Jay, and I think you're being forthright with me and you feel uncomfortable saying you're a cash buyer when in essence you're truly not. What you need is a cash partner. Okay? All I'm trying to do is give you definitions, give you words so you don't get taken out of the game before you meet with them. Okay?
Got you.
The word
Yes.
wholesaler and investor has a preconceived notion on it. Investor, they're shark, they're aggressive, they're going to lowball me offer. Wholesaler, no skin in the game. He's not going to close it. And that's it. So when people say, you can say, listen, I've done it in the past, but honestly, I'm just looking for a house like yours in that area, and I have cash to buy it with. And that's it. And then if you want to get into it and talk to them about it, I'm going to be honest with you. Once I qualify the person and I connect rapport, they don't care what I am after that. Honestly, like once they get to know you, like Jay, if we sat down for 15, 20 minutes and I got to know you, your family, and what you do, you would be much more open to anything I would say. That's just human nature. Okay. And I'm trying to give you, with today's words, everybody wants to put a label on everything and get stuck. I don't think you're lying when you say that. If you're going to do wholesaling correct, these deals will have to be fun with cash. Okay. I wouldn't say you're going to close on it in 48 hours with your personal cash. You're not making like crazy claims like that. So, that's why I want you to do it that way, because honestly, if you say you're a wholesaler investor right off the bat, more than 50 to 60% of the people will not hear you out going any further. Does it make sense?
Mr. Rick, I'm not even gonna lie to you. You were cutting out the end, like for that last little bit. I didn't hear anything. I'm
Yeah,
so
I know you
sorry,
kind of
but
cut out. So the
I'm
reality
not
is,
gonna take more of your time.
no.
I'm
The
sorry.
reality is, I want you to tell the truth. I already tell you, don't lie. But honestly, you're going to fund these deals with the cash. You're going to use a cash partner, and for that reason, I don't want people to take you out beforehand. So, is it a sleight of hand? No, it's really not. Because honestly, I want you to do this the right way. Once you connect with someone to meet with them, they will give you all the leniency in the world. But honestly, like I got to know you the 5 minutes talking to you, and I'm more comfortable every minute I talk to you. Sellers do the exact same thing. Right off the bat, if you give them an obstacle, they're going to freak out every time. Okay. So, like all my marketing, it's all local. Like, so I don't have a big giant corporation logo on it. We put a personal name on it because people like to connect with people like in person. That's what they like to do. Jay, I'm going to come back with you. Keep cutting in and out. So we'll keep going there. And I appreciate you. Good questions, man.